My name is Tom Watson. I'm 26 years old. I'll be graduating from college this year. It's not like I failed any of my classes and had to repeat a year. I just ended up graduating later than others because I spent almost 3 years studying abroad in various countries. My parents were quite passionate about education. They didn't stop me when I decided to study abroad. It seems like from a young age, they never got mad at me for anything as long as it was in pursuit of satisfying my intellectual curiosity. The reason I turned out a bit different from others might be due to this skewed approach to education. From childhood, I was drilled with advanced education, and it was taken for granted that I would excel in my studies. I always felt my parents expected something more from me. Maybe I decided to study abroad unconsciously because I felt stifled by them. It seemed I had a higher language acquisition ability than others. If I stayed in a country for a week, I would start to understand the language somehow. The sign that I could start speaking was when I began to dream in that language. The moment my dreams were no longer in Japanese, I would start speaking the language of that country. In this way, I learned to speak more than 5 languages. I really wanted to study more at universities abroad, but a situation occurred where I couldn't. My father passed away suddenly. I managed to return home in time for his funeral. On the night when my father's funeral rites were properly completed, my mother and I had a little drink together. Apart from New Year's drink, this was probably the first time I'd seen my mother drink alcohol. With my graduation looming, my mother looked at me seriously and said, "You are free to live your life as you wish." I was surprised by her unexpected words. I thought she agreed with my father's teaching to stand at the top of Japan as an elite. It seems my mother was considering my situation in her own way. Even though I went to study abroad of my own accord after high school, I was merely walking on the path my father had laid out for me. Suddenly, having the path in front of me removed and being told to do what I like, I became confused. As a result, I couldn't make a decision about finding a job, and now I've become a jobless. Every day, I think about the meaning of living as you like that my mother mentioned, but I don't understand it at all. I don't know what I want to do or what I want to be. And my mother just quietly watches over me. It seems like the world was patiently waiting for me to make a step forward with my own will. Then, one day, I found a sign. It was when I went to buy a sandwich at the convenience store in the neighborhood. There was a staff wanted sign on the glass next to the entrance. Apparently, the older lady who was always there during the day retired. I noticed she hadn't been around lately. I never experienced working part-time, idly watched the movements of the store clerks from the entrance. It looked somehow fun. Maybe a job where you say thank you to people could be a wonderful job. That's how I felt. My mother's words crossed my mind. It's okay to fail, give it a shot. With that in mind, I decided to walk into the convenience store. When I mentioned the staff wanted sign at the counter, the manager came out from the back. He looked to be about 50, with a gentle and calm demeanor. I've never worked part-time before. There was no use hiding it, so I told him the truth right from the start. The manager nodded with understanding. He seemed to think I was a shut-in with no job, always aimlessly wandering around during the day. "It's good that you've decided to work. I'd love for you to join us. Can you start from tomorrow?" he said with a smile. By the way, I haven't written a resume at this point. The manager told me it was fine to bring it on my first day of work. Things progressed so quickly that it felt kind of scary, but just like that, I became a part-time worker at the convenience store. There were 4 part-time workers including me at the convenience store. Most of the time, I was at the cash register with the housewife from the neighborhood who usually came during the day. I didn't know what to do at all. But thanks to the careful instruction from the manager and the other part-timers, I quickly adapted to the work at the convenience store. I wondered if it might have been different at other convenience stores. I am truly grateful to everyone at the convenience store. Among the part-time workers, the one working the graveyard shift was Emma Miller, who was 6 years younger than me. At the store, I was the lowest ranking, while she was above me. Since she only works at night, she is known as the night lady. There's also Mary, a high school student who comes to work after school or on her days off. She's unbelievably cheerful and positive. Her parents are against her working. I think it's good that she has a spirit of independence, but it might be difficult to say the same if you're a parent. Long day, huh? Entering with a helmet in hand was the night lady, Emma. I instinctively checked the time. It's still just 8 in the evening, too early for Emma's shift in this heavy snow. What's going on? Isn't it too early? Emma replied annoyingly. Remember, I'm off today anyway. Seems like she was hinting at me to better grasp the shift schedule. Leaving a note that she had something to discuss with the manager, Emma quickly retreated to the back room. Remembering that I also had a matter regarding my shift to discuss, I left the cash register to Mary and headed to the back room. There were no customers at that time, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to be away for a bit. As expected, Emma and the manager were in the back room, discussing shift schedules. Manager, I also have something to discuss about the shift. My father's first Memorial Day is coming up, and I'd like to take the day off. The manager, who seemed to be arranging the schedule for the holiday period, assured me by saying, sure, and secured my leave. When Tom can't make it, I can cover, even during the day. Emma volunteered to work all of my shifts. She might seem blunt, but she does have a soft spot. I remember being a little scared when I first met her. With her short black hair and a thin silver necklace shimmering above her collarbone. Her beloved vehicle was a DX125. She was a veteran part-time worker at this convenience store. I bowed my head and thanked Emma. Just then, I heard a troubled voice from Mary at the front. Rushing to check, I found a few foreigners at the cash register. Mary was trying to communicate in English, but they seemed to be French speakers, not proficient in English nor Japanese. Both sides were stuck due to the language barrier. Mary, let me take over, I said, replacing her. Turns out, they were French tourists who were not good with Japanese or English. I lived in France for a while, so I am rather proficient in French. The customers seemed relieved to find someone who could speak their language. After helping the French customers, I turned to the entrance of the back room and saw Mary looking dumbfounded. Tom, you're amazing. Can you speak French? Her admiring gaze made me feel a little embarrassed. Then came a barrage of questions. About how many languages I can speak, where I graduated from, and etc. That's impressive. So you have study abroad experience. I dream of touring museums all over the world, she said, striking a determined pose. I need to work on my foreign languages. The wonderful thing about her is her resilience. She turns failures into learning experiences. As I watched her smiling, I thought it was a great quality. The next day, Emma, who usually worked the late night shift, showed up a bit early. She beckoned me from the back room. Tom, can you come here for a moment? For a moment, I was worried I was about to be mugged, but that wasn't the case at all. Hey Tom, would you mind teaching me a foreign language? At this sudden request, I let out a surprised, huh? Emma began to plead earnestly, her hands folded in front of her. I have a dream of going on an international tour, and I've been saving up for it. Communication is key when you're abroad, right? I didn't go to college and I never properly studied a foreign language. Emma says she's always struggled with studying. She mentioned that last night, after seeing me handle a French customer, she realized the importance of knowing a language. When you can speak the local language, you feel so much closer to the people there. I want to be like you, Tom. How could I feel bad about that? As long as it's within my knowledge, I can teach you basic conversation. So I decided to accept Emma's request. This is how I became Emma's exclusive foreign language tutor. We managed our schedules, and I started teaching her foreign languages, one after another. So, where are you planning to go first? I'm thinking of touring Europe. Saying so, Emma opened a website of a company that organizes international tours. She really wanted to buy a big motorcycle and travel on her own, but she lamented that it was financially challenging. The website showed videos of motorcycles speeding down winding roads nestled between mountains. It seemed exhilarating and rather enjoyable. Emma's eyes sparkled as she watched the video, and I found myself slightly envious. Let's start with German and English, then. When I said that, Emma nodded solemnly. It seems I'll be the superior one in the realm of foreign languages. The roles are reversed, and it somehow makes me feel proud. But then a serious problem cropped up as we began our study sessions. Emma is quite sharp and quick to understand. The problem was on my end. I was terrible at teaching. I had no idea how hard it was to convey something I understood to someone who didn't. I had an intuitive approach to learning languages, and I couldn't answer Emma's logical questions. Every time we studied, Emma would get frustrated and shout, "Explain it so I can understand." That's when our mediator, Mary, would step in. Tom is naturally gifted. It can be helped. But teaching someone something is also a great learning opportunity for yourself. Even when we were arguing and the atmosphere was tense, things would soften when Mary stepped in. She was truly a blessing. As we continued with our study sessions, I realized how out of sync I was with others. I had assumed that what I could do was something anyone could do. Maybe that's why I never made any friends. I realized how arrogant I had been, and I felt terrible, probably the worst I've ever felt. When I confessed my troubles to Emma, her reaction left me somewhat disappointed. "What, you're upset about that? Isn't that just a part of who you, Tom, are? It's not a big deal, really." She was so blunt that it made me feel stupid for being upset. Interestingly, no matter how much Emma and I argued, we would always be on good terms the next day. We seemed to get along in the strangest of ways. This was the first time I have never been so deeply involved with someone else, and I couldn't help but recognize that Emma was becoming increasingly important to me. Of course, I didn't have the courage to tell Emma about these feelings. The thought of being rejected was terrifying. One day, another incident occurred at the convenience store. That day, it was Mary and I who were on duty. The manager was busy working in the back of the store. I was getting advice from Mary about her future plans. The college her parents want her to attend, and the college Mary really wants to go to. These two just don't coincide, creating a tough situation, it seems. Mary wanted to persuade her parents, but it seems they hold the same elitist views about education as my father. Mary was upset with the ongoing argument with her parents, which is quite rare to her. I wanted to say something uplifting but was at a loss for words. The silence was broken by a couple who rushed in with great urgency. They made a beeline for the cash register, standing right in front of Mary. "Mom, Dad, why?" It turned out that the couple who had rushed in were none other than Mary's parents, who we were just talking about. Apparently, Mary lied to them about quitting her part-time job. Mary, you said you quit your job. What's going on? You should be focusing on studying for your college entrance exams. Saying this, Mary's mother grabbed Mary's hand over the counter. She seemed intent on dragging her home. Please, calm down. Can't you see that Mary is upset? Why don't you have a more constructive conversation about her future? Upon hearing my words, Mary's mother gave me a fierce glare. What do you know? You're working a part-time job at a convenience store at your age. Did you even go to college, or did you graduate from a third-rate college? Her words were dismissive, which riled me up. But I didn't want to brag about my own education in such a situation. Doesn't Mary have a wonderful dream? Why do you oppose her trying to find the fastest route to achieving that dream? Mary's dream is to visit art museums around the world. Her ultimate dream is to study art history at university and become a museum curator. It's a truly wonderful dream. I passionately explained this to her parents. But Mary's mother snorted in disdain. If Mary fails her college entrance exams, will you take responsibility? What if she majors in art and struggles in the future? Do you really think she has enough time to change her college preferences now? Cornered by her words, I was momentarily at a loss for words. Looking at Mary, she was looking at me with pleading eyes. Seeing her look, I steeled myself. Got it. No matter what college, I will get her accepted, I declared, and Mary's parents stared at me as if I were a strange creature. Understood. We'll let you try, but you only get one shot. Allow Mary to apply to just one school of her choice. If that doesn't work out, you must follow our instructions. Mary's father, who had been silently listening to our exchange, spoke calmly. Perhaps he wasn't directly opposed to Mary's dream. I promise. I answered, looking straight into Mary's dad's eyes. Mary's mom seemed to want to say something, but her husband gently urged her to leave. Having talked a big game, I ended up tutoring Mary from the next day. Between my part-time job and tutoring, plus helping Emma with her foreign languages, my days suddenly became busy. Is Mary's application going to be all right? I only graduated from high school, so I don't know much about the application process, but isn't changing your preferred school at this stage a lot of work? Emma, who had been reading a German book with a dictionary in hand, asked me with a hint of worry. I think it'll be fine, I responded. Still, while the application process should be okay, I believe it's crucial to have her parents' cooperation to realize Mary's dream. Well, you have to take responsibility and convince Mary's parents. She makes it sound easy, but I wonder if I can actually pull it off. You know, my dad was the same way, always telling me to study and become an elite. After he passed away, I had no idea what to do. Embarrassing, huh? I said, scratching my head. Well, I kinda expected that. You do give off a pampered golden boy vibe. Emma chuckled. What do you mean, pampered golden boy? I felt a bit annoyed, as if I were being mocked. It means you were cherished. It's a good thing. I wasn't sure if she was complimenting me or mocking me. Either way, I felt embarrassed. You look cool when you're working hard. Her comment made me even more embarrassed, and I hid my face behind the magazine I was reading. Seeing my reaction, Emma chuckled again. As for Mary's exam results, they were a tremendous success. She was accepted into the art college of her choice. What's more, her grades were among the top and she was chosen as a scholarship student, which would cover half of her tuition. Mary's parents finally admitted defeat. They both apologized to me, and her mom thanked me while crying. That was probably the first time I revealed where I had gone to college. Everyone present was so surprised that it caught me off guard. Mary successfully took the first step towards her dream. Now, it's up to her how she paves her way. That's probably up to Mary, I guess. On the other hand, Emma got a big motorcycle. She mastered German, English, and French, and is getting ready for an international tour. Watching the two of them closely, I was taken aback. I'm the only one who's been pacing in the same place. Everyone else is moving forward, but I'm not making any progress. Suddenly, I felt small and insignificant. Every night, I lay in bed and ponder what I want to do most until I fall asleep. And yet, I never come to a conclusion. I'd rather solve math problems than this. Seeing my day-by-day depression, Mary approached me with a concerned look. I decided to consult Mary about my situation. I wondered what the ever-optimistic Mary would say. Nervously, I awaited her response. Why does it have to be about what you want to do, rather than who you want to be with? I think that's what they mean when they say revelation. It's not about what I want to do, but who I want to be with. Being with that person might be what I truly want. I felt like I'd arrived at an incredible answer. Good evening. As usual, Emma, the night lady, arrived for work. Seeing Emma, I was struck by a sudden realization. On impulse, I called out to her. Can I ride on the back of your bike? I want to be with you. Suddenly confessing, Mary let out a surprised squeal. Emma looked bewildered. Her eyes were wide with surprise. I'm not sure if you understood. This isn't an invitation for a road trip. I like you and I want to be with you. As Emma froze with a bewildered look on her face, I attempted to explain myself more clearly but was stopped by Mary. She scolded me harshly later for lacking delicacy. Emma sighed lightly and gave a wry smile. It's fine to be together, but work on being able to ride your own bike. That was Emma's response. The tips of her ears peeking out from her short hair were bright red. I'll do my best, I promised, scratching my head. Handle it with care. That's me, getting onto Emma's beloved bike. At the convenience store parking lot, she asked if I wanted to give it a go. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Really? Is it okay?" Straddling Emma's bike, I revved the engine. Experiencing its vibration for the first time, I was fascinated by its power. I'll enroll in driving school tomorrow. I was all fired up from riding a big bike for the first time. I couldn't wait to control a motorcycle all by myself. See, you've found what you most want to do now. Mary, triumphant as if her theory had been proven right, was smiling. I had to admit, she was spot on. Change your perspective, and a new scenery comes into view. When you hit a wall, think of another way around. It's a simple thing, but I found it challenging. 2 years later, Mary began touring art museums around the world while studying art history in college. She said she was investing all the money she saved from her part-time job into her future. As for me, I kept reliving that vibration. In the midst of landscapes I'd never seen before, all I could hear was the sound of my motorcycle's engine and the noise of the wind. Emma led the way. She skillfully used her slender body to maneuver her big bike. I struggled just to keep up with Emma as she showed off her fluid cornering. But I was happy to be able to see new scenery together. Our destination on this journey is Milan, Italy. When we arrive there, I plan to kneel down to her. I've decided on the words for my proposal. I want to follow you for the rest of my life. Emma might be a bit taken aback. She may sigh and say, "Just ride freely," with a smile. Or maybe she will blush, her ears turning bright red as she looks away, trying to hide her embarrassment. Just imagining gets my heart racing. Milan is still far away. The end of this journey will be the beginning of my life with Emma. I believe in that. My name is Steve Hart, a 41 years old, single man. I'm a local newspaper reporter in my hometown. I harbor a secret that I can't share with anyone. Truth be told, even at this age, I have no experience with women. There are various reasons for this, but in short, I guess I don't have the guts. I've had my chances. I mean, it might sound odd, but I do get approached by women from time to time. The issue of not being able to cross that final line was always a matter of the heart. After repeatedly hurting people, letting them down, I eventually got tired of dealing with people. If we're destined to break up, I figured it's better not to date from the start. That way, neither of us gets hurt, and I won't disappoint anyone by failing to meet expectations. Once I reached this state of mind, I found peace in my heart. Sure, there's a bit of loneliness, but I've come to terms with that as the price to pay for my peace of mind. The change in my life came this spring. Covering the local news, I was putting together a feature on cherry blossom cookies for the upcoming cherry blossom season. I had the chance to make these cookies at a well-established local bakery. A small shop run by an elderly couple, their only granddaughter, Jenny, who attracted customers. As they had no successor, it seemed that Jenny would eventually take over. I heard she had graduated from a culinary school with a focus on pastry arts. Thank you for today. Making these traditional cookies for the first time was a great experience. I'm sure I'll be able to write a good article, I said to Jenny, while enjoying the cherry blossom cookies and tea that I made myself. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I must say, seeing you in an apron was priceless. I had met her a few times at local Chamber of Commerce year-end parties. She was always surrounded by a lively crowd, and I could never get close to her at these events. It seems that she had properly found me, who usually drinks a small beer in the corner of the banquet hall. I always thought you were quiet and cool, so seeing you in a white apron was quite a surprise. I wish I had taken a picture for memory. As she chuckled remembering the scene, I felt a bit embarrassed. She's the face of this shopping district, a local icon. With her cheerful personality and charm, she's quite the celebrity around here. Although she is concerned about being over 30 and wants to give up the face of the shop, she's still popular. Cold vibe, that's the first time I've heard that. As I showed my surprise, she shook her head seriously. No way, you must know that there are plenty of girls after you, Steve. Leaning towards me, she said this, and I could feel my face flushing. She smiled at me from a distance where I could clearly see her pretty nose and well-defined eyelashes. So, I'm going to take a shot here. Please, will you be my boyfriend, Steve? What? It was so sudden that I thought my ears had gone crazy. You don't want to? As she looked up at me inquiringly, I didn't know how to respond. She was charming, and she seemed to have quite a liking for me. I didn't dislike her. In fact, I might even say that I like her. But it's not that I don't like you, Jenny. I just can't be with anyone. I don't have the courage to date. I tried to respond to her feelings honestly. I told her that I didn't plan on dating anyone. She seemed to think for a moment, then quickly smiled at me. But I like you, Steve. Don't forget that. I want to continue liking you. If I ever stop liking you, I'll tell you. She said this and put her hands together as if praying. Her fingertips were slightly trembling. From the trembling of her fingertips, I could tell she was serious. Thank you. I understand your feelings, Jenny. Upon hearing my response, she seemed to relax, the tension leaving her shoulders. From that day forward, Jenny and I started seeing each other more often. Most of the time, it was her who initiated it. To avoid giving her false hopes, I refrained from inviting her myself. I should probably refuse her invitations altogether. But I couldn't be cruel enough to turn her down. My indecisiveness might be hurting her. It might sound arrogant, but it's true that my heart ached every time Jenny invited me. Would you like to go to this great seafood restaurant I found today, too? Jenny had contacted me. She was always finding delicious places to eat or fun events and inviting me. As a local reporter, I really appreciated her suggestions. We arranged to meet at the restaurant over the weekend. The thought of seeing her bright smile made the weekend seem a bit more exciting. On the day of our meeting, Jenny, who is usually punctual, was unusually late. She is usually there before me, waving both hands to greet me. I was feeling anxious because she wasn't at our meeting place. She didn't show up even after 5 minutes. Thinking she might have had an accident, I was about to take out my cell phone to contact her when I heard, "Sorry to keep you waiting," and felt a tap on my shoulder. When I turned around, there was Jenny, looking a bit tired. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I was the one who invited you. I'm really sorry." Jenny deeply bowed her head as she said this. "No worries at all. More importantly, are you okay? Anything happened?" As I spoke, she lifted her head. The moment she did, I was taken aback. She was shedding tears. Passersby glanced at us. There I was, looking like a jerk, making a woman cry on the street. I felt hopeless, flustered, not knowing why she was crying. I suggested we sit somewhere and guided her to a bench. During the walk, she kept repeating "I'm sorry," while her tears continued to flow. I was worried about what could have happened to her, my heart racing. After seating her on a park bench, I went to a vending machine and bought her a warm tea. She accepted the can of tea with both hands and said in a soft voice, "Thank you." Perhaps the warm tea had comforted her a bit. Finally, I was able to stop her tears. I waited patiently for her to share what had happened. "I'm sorry. I lost my composure. I've been nothing but trouble today. I'm really sorry." I tried to comfort her, smiling and saying, "It's okay. Actually, the cat I had for a long time passed away the day before yesterday. It was old, so I know it was its time, but that doesn't make it any less sad. I remember there always used to be a calico cat sunbathing in front of the pastry shop. So that cat had passed away. I had it with me for so long." Saying that, she began to tear up again. She had been with the cat until its last moments. I could tell from her voice that it hadn't been a painless death. Still, she had stayed by its side until the end, meeting its gaze. It's hard to have your wishes come true. She kicked a pebble at her feet as if she was a bit annoyed. Life's full of unfulfilled wishes. At my words, she nodded slightly. I've never had a pet. I'd never had a chance to raise a pet since I was a child. I had no interactions with animals. My grandparents, who raised me, didn't like animals. I barely have any memories of my parents. I grew up under the care of my grandparents. When I asked them about my parents, they wouldn't tell me anything. I only vaguely remembered my mother's face as she said, "I'll be back soon." She left me behind. And I never saw her again. It wasn't until I grew up that I realized I had been abandoned. I had been left by my mother. Since I didn't remember my father at all from the start, I didn't miss him. But about Mom, I have been so lonely. But I could never forgive my mother, who just said, "I'll be back," and left me behind. That's why I find it difficult to form relationships with anyone. The fear of getting close to someone, knowing we might eventually part ways, is overwhelming. The thought of waiting for someone to leave me, just like my mother did, is unbearable even to imagine. When I became an adult, I could have adopted a pet, but I never did. I would eventually have to see them off. Just imagining it was painful. I confessed to my girlfriend that I can't own pets because I can't bear to think of losing them. She looks at me, surprised. It's the first time I've talked to her about myself. Thank you. I learned something important about you, Steve. The face that was crying a while ago turned into a gentle smile. She smiled as if to cheer me up. In the end, I decided to go home without having the seafood we were supposed to eat that day. When we reached the exit of the park, she stopped. She put her finger on her lips and said, "Shh." We could faintly hear a kitten meowing. She quietly approached where the kitten's voice was coming from. Her figure disappeared into the thick of the flower bed. And when she came out of the thick, she was holding 3 kittens in her arms. "I found them," she muttered, seeming a bit stunned. But still, she lovingly looked down at the kittens. "What will you do? Take them to the police station?" She looked puzzled at my words. "I'm going to take them home. I plan to raise them." "What? But won't you be heartbroken again?" "Why, aren't you scared?" My true feelings slipped out spontaneously. I mean, just a while ago, she was crying about parting with a cat, and now she's picking up abandoned kittens. I can't even understand that. In a few years, another heartbreaking parting will be waiting. Rather than imagining the future sadness, there's something more important. Jenny said this with a slightly sad smile. "Are you afraid of dating me, Steve?" Her words hit the bullseye for me, and I am at a loss for words. I felt a cold sweat trickling down my back. "I won't leave you, Steve. Can't you trust me just a little bit?" In Jenny's hands, the kittens were looking at me. She was looking at me with the same pure eyes. I thought that if I couldn't take a step forward here, I would be alone forever. "I may not be perfect, but I'd appreciate your understanding." At my response, Jenny nodded vigorously and laughed, saying, "Leave it to me." Half a year after we started dating, it came time to greet her parents. I had met her grandparents, who run a traditional bakery, several times. But this was the first time meeting her parents, who live in a different place. Fortunately, her parents warmly welcomed me. I was tense all the time, but it seemed to be okay. "My name is Steve Hart. I am in a relationship with your daughter with the marriage in view," I said as I moved my seat to bow in their direction. When I raised my face, her mother, Emma, covered her mouth with both hands, looking at me with a surprised expression. "Hart, you said Steve, right? Excuse me, but is your mother named Lisa?" Why was my mother's name coming from Emma, whom I had met for the first time today? I was so surprised that I couldn't respond immediately. Her parents were waiting for my answer, holding their breath. Taking a small, deep breath to compose myself, I replied, "Yes, my mother's name is Lisa, but I don't remember much about my mother. After she left me at my grandparents' house, she never came to pick me up." There was no point in lying. I told the truth. Upon hearing this, Emma began to shed large tears. You resent your mother, don't you?" Her voice was shaking with tears. "Yes, if I said I didn't, I'd be lying," I admitted. At my answer, Emma began to sob uncontrollably. Her husband quietly hugged her. I was confused by her repeatedly apologizing to me in a low voice, saying, "I'm sorry." As if she had sensed something, Jenny stood up and brought a picture from the shelf. Handed over to me quietly, I looked at the photo. In it were her still young parents and my vaguely remembered mother standing shoulder to shoulder. "Wait, this is my mom." With her emotions settled and tears finally stopped, Emma began to speak slowly. My mother and her parents had met in Colorado. My mother was a photographer who accompanied to high-altitude mountaineering trips. Even on the day of this photo, she was in the mountains as part of a TV program staff. Her parents loved mountaineering, and they had encountered my mother several times up on the mountains. Not long after this picture was taken, Emma slipped and fell. To call for help, my mother ran down the mountain as fast as she could. Apparently, the radio that the staff had brought along was unusable due to an error. As a result, Emma, who had slipped, was rescued by the rescue team that my mother called for. But my mother, it seems, had a heart attack at the mountain cabin and never returned. My mother was the savior of Emma's life. What a coincidence. But why did my grandparents hide the truth about my mother? I had always thought my mother abandoned me. She didn't abandon me. She just couldn't come back. When I later confirmed it with my grandparents, they said that it was my mother's dying wish not to tell me about her death. My mother, who was a professional photographer accompanying high-altitude climbers, had always said she didn't want me to know if she ever died on the mountain. She didn't want me to hate the mountains. My mother loved the mountains. And if I didn't know she had passed away, I wouldn't have to grieve, she used to say. I think it's a selfish claim. But somehow, I felt like I understood my mother's feelings. It's such a strange connection. Must be your mother's mischief. Emma said with a gentle smile. I will definitely make Jenny happy, I declared clearly to her parents. The next moment, Jenny hugged me happily. I'm not alone anymore. Thinking so made me feel more determined. When the wedding preparations were in full swing, I stayed at her apartment for the first time. It's embarrassing, but it was my first night with her. As the weather forecast announced the arrival of the harsh winter, it was very cold. She was excited and said, I got a new heater. I was nervous and my hands were sweaty. Gently, okay. Just as she whispered, and I gently reached into the heater, I heard a cat's voice. I tried to pull my hand out quickly, but it was a moment too late. I felt a sharp pain on the back of my hand. Ouch, it got me. When I pulled my hand out and checked, I had 3 scratch marks on the back of my hand. Oh, I thought you two would get along, she said with a disappointed face. Now, my nemesis are the kittens she picked up that night. Although they're kittens, they've grown quickly. It seems they don't like my presence, and they're on guard against me ever since I first set foot in the apartment. Attempting to touch the peaceful kitty under the heated blanket, I was immediately rebuffed. Since we'll become a family once we're married, I'd like to establish friendly relations with them tonight. However, the little guy hissed at me. They might think I'm trying to steal her from them. I, on the other hand, want to enjoy the soft feel of a cat for the first time, but I'm refused, and it gets me down. Hey, don't be so upset. They'll warm up to you soon. She comforts me, but a sense of anxiety lingers. Thinking too far ahead is your bad habit, isn't it, Steve? Indeed, I do often overthink the future, and it leads to a lot of anxiety and hesitation. Whenever that happens, she's always there to give me a gentle push. With a broad smile, she assures me, everything will be all right. I can't tell how much I've been saved by those words. Spurred on by her, I faced my mother's death. I dug up an old newspaper article about my mom, and together, we visited the site. Upon reaching the cabin, I found a picture of my mom among the photos hanging on the walls. In the picture, my mom had a big smile on her face. Looking at that smile, tears well up in my eyes. She gently rubs my back gently. At that moment, an older member of the rescue team who walked into the cabin spoke to me, his eyes welling up. Looking back and forth between the picture and me, he smiled and said, "We've been waiting for you." He was apparently an old friend of my mom. He said he recognized me right away because I look so much like my mom. "I knew you would come visit someday." I've come this far in search of my mother's happy moments." Upon hearing this, he nodded emphatically. Then he pointed at a section of the wall and said, "Read this." There, I found messages written by regular visitors to the cabin. Among them, I found my mother's words. "Enjoy life even when you can't see what's ahead, Lisa." Finally, I received a message from my mother. Tears of joy, tears of sorrow, and tears of regret for having resented my mother all flowed out together, unstoppable. She gently took my hand. "Next time, we'll bring our son or daughter along, Lisa. Yes, we'll come and show your grandchild." Telling this to my mother's smiling face in the photo, I felt as though she gave a slight nod. It felt as though one long journey had come to an end within me. From now on, my journey won't be a solo one. I'll live life to the fullest, even if the future is uncertain. That's the promise I made to my mom, because I believe that's the kind of life she wanted for me. How was that? Subscribing to our channel can motivate us to create more content. See you in our next video. My name is Robert Moore. I'm a 30-year-old working for a major food company. I've been working at the company for 8 years since I graduated from college. I work in the planning and sales department, but I'm just an average employee, not particularly outstanding, nor particularly lacking. Currently, I'm stationed at the company's headquarters, hoping to avoid a demotion and keep working as it is. I have a wife who I met during my college days, a classmate of mine. Her name is Grace. We got to know each other better because we were in the same economics seminar at the same university, and we got married right after graduating college. Grace didn't get a job after graduating because we got married, and she became a full-time housewife. We had expected to have a child right away after getting married, but there was no sign of it happening, even after several years. We both wanted a child quickly, but since we were still in our 20s, we hadn't seriously considered any fertility treatments. Grace has always been a good student, always more committed to her studies than me, and I secretly admired her for that. Unable to have a child after getting married, Grace seemed to have started studying for a professional certification. Perhaps she had time on her hands because she was a full-time housewife at home without children. And recently, Grace told me she had passed the Certified Public Tax Accountant exam. "Robert, I've passed the CPDA exam. Well done, Grace. I'm proud of you." I congratulated Grace with a smile, but there was a possibility that my face may have been a bit tight. I'm just an ordinary white-collar worker without any position. Grace is a certified professional with a promising future. And with her planning to work as a CPDA, I began to worry about what would happen with our plans for a child. If Grace were to make good use of her qualification, earn more than me, excel socially, and have and raise a child, where would I stand? I felt anxious, thinking that I might not be needed anymore. As Grace was filled with enthusiasm after acquiring her certification, my feelings began to darken day by day. And our relationship with Grace became increasingly strained. Grace seemed not to understand why I was becoming distant. "Robert, have you been feeling unwell recently?" Grace often asked me with a puzzled look. But I couldn't bring myself to admit my feelings of inferiority to Grace, and I just resented my pathetic self. I began to come home late and spent more days drinking with my colleagues after work. Conversations with Grace at home became less frequent. I still loved Grace, but my petty male pride was undoubtedly straining our relationship. Grace seemed to be considering working as a CPDA since she had acquired the certification. And I broached the topic of divorce with Grace. Our conversations had ceased, and our relationship had become uncomfortable, so Grace agreed to the divorce quite easily. Perhaps Grace also felt guilty about not being able to have a child, or so I thought. The day before I divorced Grace, I went to my favorite diner alone and cried in secret. As I traced back our days together, remembering Grace, whom I first met in college, I wasn't sure if getting a divorce was the right thing. "Robert, let me do it for you." From our college days, Grace had always taken care of me with a cheerful smile. Whether it was taking notes for me at school or helping me with homework, it seems that I had always been dependent on Grace. But there was a part of me that couldn't face such a pitiful self. Grace probably didn't come to dislike me, but the flow of events was unstoppable. We put an end to our married life and each started our own lives. After the divorce, Grace and I stopped contacting each other. I, who had parted ways with Grace, was supposed to throw myself into my work with a fresh mindset. However, since no one was home when I returned, my passion for work seemed to have further waned. I felt like I had lost my reason to work hard, and I just kind of went on with my work day after day. It's not that I hated my job, but I didn't find it particularly rewarding, and naturally, my performance didn't improve. Then, I was transferred from the planning and sales department to the accounting department. I had no experience in accounting, and I didn't understand why I was suddenly transferred to the accounting department. But thinking that it's better than being demoted, I ended up working in the accounting department. Dealing with finances meant that it was a pretty nerve-wracking job. What's more, my boss in the accounting department was the president's son, a man named Jacob. Jacob was highly motivated and famously strict. Having graduated from a university abroad, and with plenty of experience in major companies, he also boasted qualifications as both a certified public accountant and a certified public tax accountant in a foreign country. With such a profile, the president's son was rumored to be the next president. It was reassuring for the company to have such talent, but unfortunately, he was quite harsh to other employees as well. "Robert, what is this document? Generally, you are too slow to complete paperwork and your analysis is too superficial." I'm sorry. I just transferred and it's been quite challenging." Don't make excuses every time. Excuses are cheap. Our company is set to grow rapidly and no one will listen to excuses. "I'm sorry. I'll be more careful in the future." If you have time to apologize, you should study more about accounting. How will you work in a company without understanding even basic accounting? "Yes, I'll study more about accounting." I was sweating bullets being chastised by Jacob. I seriously felt like I was in deep trouble. I realized that I didn't have time to complain about not understanding accounting. "All right, it's a matter of pride now. I'll master accounting through and through." I felt a fiery passion in my heart for the first time in a long while. Maybe I was influenced by Jacob's zeal, but his words seemed to guide me in understanding that I couldn't go on as I was. I went to a bookstore and bought books on accounting, but just reading the text didn't help me understand much. After doing some research, I felt that it might be best to attend an accounting school. I could make friends who are interested in accounting and exchange information. So, I quickly enrolled in a school that was relatively close to my home. Because of all the overtime Jacob had me doing during the week, I chose a school that offered weekend classes. "All right, I'll become a professional accountant here. I'll surprise Jacob." I opened the door to the accounting school with determination. Already, the room was filled with lots of students. Seeing this scene made me reminisce about my student days and my heart soared for the first time in a while. It made me nostalgically remember my youthful days. Looking back on my student days, my memories were filled with Grace. Come to think of it, Grace was always there by my side. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice that the class had started, and the school's tax consultant, the teacher, had come in. The moment I saw the teacher, I exclaimed in surprise. The tax consultant who was the teacher at this school was none other than Grace. Yes, Grace, my ex-wife. There was no mistake. She seems to have become younger and more lively. She must be finding fulfillment in her work as a tax consultant. Grace was passionately explaining accounting. Grace's explanation was very easy to understand, and even a beginner like me could grasp the structure and concept of accounting. The other students were also attentively listening to Grace's lesson, nodding their heads. As expected of Grace, she's doing a great job. I felt a sense of pride in Grace as if I were still her husband. Maybe she noticed my intense gaze, because Grace suddenly looked my way and our eyes met. Grace seemed surprised for a moment, but quickly regained her composure and concentrated on her lecture. After the lecture ended, I went outside the classroom. Then, Grace came running up to me to talk. "Robert, what on earth are you doing here?" Grace seemed genuinely surprised and stared at me with wide eyes. I asked her if she had time to talk at a nearby cafe. When Grace silently nodded, we decided to go to the cafe together. Doing this brings back memories of my college days with Grace. When we arrived at a cafe near the school, Grace began firing questions at me. "I was really surprised to see you in class, Robert. Why were you attending the lecture, and why haven't you contacted me until now? What on earth have you been doing?" After the divorce, Grace worked as a tax accountant, and she told me she also taught at a business school on weekends. I thought to myself that it was just like Grace, diligent and hard-working. She hadn't changed a bit since our student days. It seemed that Grace cared about me even after our divorce, but because I hadn't reached out at all, it was difficult for her to do so. I told her that I had been transferred to the accounting department at work, and that my new boss was a rather strict person who didn't compromise. Because of this, I had to study accounting hard, even on weekends, and that's why I started attending the business school. "I had no idea that you were teaching at this accounting school, Grace." When I said this with a laugh, Grace also laughed. "What a coincidence, but if that's the case, I can help you out." With her eyes sparkling, Grace told me that. From then on, whenever I went to the school on weekends, Grace gave me extra lessons. She answered all my questions, and thanks to the homework she came up with for me, I gradually gained a deep understanding of the subject. Whenever I had a problem with accounting at work, I would consult with Grace, and she would come up with several solutions for me. I started to digest her proposals and submit them to the company after analyzing them. I started spending hours debating with Grace every weekend. And before I knew it, Grace had once again become an indispensable person in my life. "Hey Grace, have you found someone else?" One day, I decided to voice the question that had been on my mind. I felt incredibly selfish asking Grace to get back together after I was the one who initiated the divorce, but I couldn't help but ask. Grace silently shook her head. I felt a profound sense of relief and couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you laughing? Do you think it's funny that I'm not popular?" Grace glared at me, seeming a little annoyed. "No, it's not that. I'm just relieved that you're still single. I've been reminiscing about our student days and wondering if we could spend time together again." At that, Grace's face turned bright red. It seemed that my words had made her a little shy. She was back to the face of the wife I knew, rather than the serious instructor. Since then, Grace and I started living together again. When I came home from work, Grace would listen to any work-related troubles I had. By that time, Grace had become a reliable partner and an irreplaceable presence in my life. Change was certainly happening at the company. Jacob was devising a new management strategy to further expand the company. I fully supported Jacob from an accounting perspective. Of course, this included a lot of Grace's ideas, but that was a secret within the company. Then, the management strategy Jacob built succeeded, greatly increasing the company's sales. Soon, my remarkable performance started to be talked about within the company. Jacob, my passionate boss and rumored to be the next CEO, was impressed with my work and asked what happened. "I found a really good accounting school," I replied, blushing a little at Jacob's praise. "I knew you had it in you, Robert. You've been studying hard. I want you to continue working hard in this company as my right-hand man." I was truly happy to hear this from Jacob, the highly respected and enthusiastic boss. To my surprise, I was promoted to a higher position. At that time, I remarried Grace. Although it was a marriage to the same woman, it might not be correct to call it a remarriage, but well, that's beside the point. I've been promoted, but I'm going to resign from the company. Jacob was very surprised by my words and tried to stop me. But I wanted to be with Grace. So, I studied hard to become a tax accountant, and, in fact, I managed to get my certification. Thanks to Grace, I had come to find accounting interesting. Moreover, Grace, as it happens, was joyfully pregnant. Now, I'm going to open a CPA firm as the principal accountant along with Grace. The most important person that I once let go due to my foolish pride, Grace. The second chance that I've been given, I vowed not to waste it, and never to part from Grace again.